Hello there.
Hi there, PJ. How are you today?
I'm well. I'm well. Hello, Blaine. How are you?
I'm doing well, PJ. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you as well. So we are on the cusp of a nice long weekend. What are our plans?
Well, together or apart? Because I don't think we're going to see each other.
We're not.
Yeah,
Actually.
that's too bad. Yeah, you know what? Tonight is my son-in-law's 30th birthday, and as you would imagine, a 30-year-old would want to do on the night of his 30th birthday. He's choosing to spend it with his father-in-law. So my daughter decided that we're going to do a dinner tonight. So I'm doing that, and I've got a little road trip tomorrow, and so yeah, it's gonna be a relaxing, joyful, long weekend. How about you?
Uh, just laying low, right? It's going to be
Yeah.
super hot here in Chicago. Unfortunately, of course, the weather gets hot right when the weekend
Super
comes.
hot in Chicago. Those are not words you often hear said
No.
No,
together.
no. We a couple of weeks ago or week before last or whatever, we hit 120 feel.
What?
Yeah,
What?
it's the
You're
hottest
kidding.
ever, the hottest ever recorded in Chicago. So it was terrible. We hated it. We're not used to it. Bring us the cold. We're fine with that. Heat, humidity, what the hell's that? We don't like it. We don't get it away.
Oh.
Yeah,
To each their
exactly.
own. I live in Tampa Bay because I love the warmth and the heat and the fact that I can go jogging with my dog just about every day of the year and do it in shorts. So
Mm.
Hey,
there.
I'm going to split the difference with you guys. I'm up on Whidbey Island up near Seattle, and it's
Oh, beautiful.
That is a
74
nice
degrees here
place.
today. Beautiful weather, no humidity to speak of. And
That's
I'm going to
awesome.
go fishing this weekend.
Good for
Oh
you.
wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, and,
What
and,
what
and yeah, Tal, it's interesting. Today is my my oldest grandson's birthday.
Oh,
Okay. Is he
Oh,
spending it with
yeah.
you though?
Huh?
Is he
Yeah,
spending it with you?
actually,
He is. Okay.
he
All
is. We're
right.
going to actually go skydiving.
That's awesome.
So
All right. That's fantastic.
I'm going to see
sorry.
if
I'm
you're
sorry.
dive.
You're saying you're gonna jump out of a perfectly
Wait, you know
plane.
what? I totally glossed over that. You know what? I heard it, it entered my brain, and then I just didn't even comprehend what he just said. You're going what?
I
What
You're
are you
going
doing?
where? Yeah, I used to fly jumpers years ago as a pilot. Now, yeah, I'm at an age now where I need a medical clearance to jump, so I'm not going to jump. Uh,
Uh-huh.
couldn't get my doctor to sign off on that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Not
I
because
feel a
he
little bit
wouldn't, just
better.
because I didn't have a chance to talk to him about this. But my grandson is jumping. Yeah.
Got
Wow.
it.
So
Wow. That's something.
Yeah,
Wow.
Isaac Newton wouldn't sign off on me jumping out of a plane. So there'd be a lot of gravitational pull on that. That's amazing. That's amazing. But
Well,
first,
maybe we should tell people who the hell Blaine is. I mean, we're
I was
talking to
just about
Blaine
to
and they
say
don't
that.
even know who he is.
I was
So,
just about
okay.
to
All
say it.
right.
So
Okay. All right. Well,
Blaine's the man.
sorry to be impatient. Yeah.
No, 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 no. So our guest today is author, television host, professor, consultant, CEO, and prolific entrepreneur, Blaine Bartlett. Blaine, pick a title. My God. Blaine is the author of 5 books, including the #1 international bestseller, Compassionate Capitalism, A Journey to the Soul of Business. And his newest book is The Leadership Mindset Weekly. As CEO of Avatar Resources, which is a global leadership consultancy he founded in 1987. Blaine consults, advises, and coaches globally with leaders, executives, companies, and governments to change the way leadership is used to foster thriving through compassionate capitalism. He is internationally recognized as a leader development master, and through his work has personally delivered programs to and worked with more than 300,000 individuals, directly impacting more than 1 million people worldwide. He is a co-host of Office Hours on Apple TV, was featured in the TV series World's Greatest Motivators, and also featured in the movie and book Think and Grow Rich: The Legacy. In his spare time, which I don't even know how you have that, Blaine is also an adjunct professor at Beijing University, managing director of Global Coaching Alliance, and sits on several boards. Blaine, Mr. Insomniac, it's an honor and a privilege to have you on our show, Braving Business Podcast.
PJ, it's a thrill to be here, and I thank you for the invitation, both you and Tal. Thank you.
You welcome, and we're honored to have you. As PJ said, it's a heck of an intro, and we are. I think this is the 13th or 14th episode we're recording on the season, and it's been like that. We've had guest after guest with, long introductions. And PJ and I, when we started the show, we were like, we're not going to do long introductions. We're just going to do, this is our guest and we'll talk it out. But the reality is, such accomplishments. How do you not, make sure that you give people the kudos they deserve, and you deserve plenty.
Yeah.
So you know what? I'm just going to jump right in. I'd love to get into the topic of compassionate capitalism, which is something that I am deeply passionate about. I've read your book. I'm a fan of your thinking, and I'd love to hear more. I'd love my audience to hear more about your background in leadership development. Talk to us about kind of what compassionate capitalism is and how you came to that idea, and to the extent it makes sense, tie it to resilience and overcoming obstacles, which I think is part and parcel of what compassionate capitalism is about.
Absolutely. Yeah. The compassionate capitalism came out of some conversations I had with John Mackey, who co-founded Whole Foods, and Raj Sisodia, who's a professor, business professor at Babson University. They jointly co-authored a book called Conscious Capitalism. And in my conversation with them, both jointly and separately, I kept coming back to a noticing that I had that consciousness wasn't enough. Now, because what they were doing in the book was they're saying we expand your stakeholder universe. You're thinking about who are the actual stakeholders in the business. It's not just the shareholders; it's others. Yeah, and it's writ large. So that ripple effect kind of goes out there. But what was missing for me in the book was, how do you behave in a manner that is reflective of a recognition that you've got larger stakeholders? And that's where compassion came in. It's one thing to recognize that there's a larger stakeholder universe out there, but am I connected to it? And if I'm connected to it, how do I behave as a consequence of that connection? Because it's impossible to behave compassionately towards something if I don't feel connected to it. So all of this, kind of a long story short here, just pulling on that thread, ended up being this book called Compassionate Capitalism. And it was essentially just a way of me defining something as an alternative model to crony capitalism. I wanted to take a look at comparing the behaviors of both, and the behaviors of crony capitalism result in what we have today: wealth disparity, social unrest, blah blah blah. I mean, you can fill in the blanks. Environmental degradation, which would be the antithesis of what you get if people are acting and leaders are acting compassionately towards the folks that are impacted by their decisions.
By the way, did you expect this book to be an international #1 bestseller? I mean, when you wrote this book, did you know the kind of audience that was going to end up loving this book?
I never expect my books to sell. Truly, I mean, I write them for myself more than anything else. Now, do I have an audience in mind? Yeah, I do. But I was thrilled. We hit #1 in five international markets in various business categories with that book when we released it. And that, for me, it was kind of like a proof of concept. It's kind of like, okay, there's receptivity to this message, evidently. And it's being used right now in some college curriculums, and so I'm thrilled. I'm very proud of that book, actually.
That's amazing. Well, you coined a term, really, right? Like you've created a movement, and capitalism in and of itself, the word capitalism has such a negative connotation, right? Depending on who's using it and how you experience it out in the world today. Getting people to wrap their mind around the mindset that capitalism can also be compassionate. What was that like? Was that like a harder task than you thought, or like what was that like?
I remember, PJ, this goes back before I wrote the book. This goes back. I was invited to speak at a Renaissance weekend. And
you mean like guys with swords?
No, actually, President Clinton, Al Gore, the Hilton Head, and gathering of Nobel laureates and Chief Justice. All kinds of people come together here. And so I thought, well, I'll give this thing a flyer. And so in one of the hallmarks of the Renaissance weekend is everybody speaks in some way, shape, or form. and it's just about sharing ideas. And so I thought, well, I'll give this thing a flyer. And they put me in a room with basically a group of Wall Street bankers. And so I was talking about compassionate capitalism. And as my mother used to say, you could have heard, it was like a lead balloon.
Is that like talking about being
lead balloon in a
vegetarian
pin
with a
factory.
Is that like being talking about vegetarianism with ranchers? Do you think?
Yeah,
Is that about the same thing?
It reminded me of Oprah. Talking to the cattle ranchers in Texas.
Yeah,
yeah. So it was kind of like, okay, that was a loud thud. But it was also, and this is where obstacles come into play, I think, really interestingly. It was feedback about something that got my attention. Okay, if somebody that's in charge of monetary systems don't resonate with this, what's missing? Yeah, either in my messaging or what's missing in the consciousness of those that are listening. And either one of those becomes a gateway towards continual movement. So, and that actually came to become how I defined, success. It's the process of continuous, developing the capacity to continuously start over. And that's essentially how I define success. And so I looked at that and I went, okay, let me retool this a little bit here with two things in mind. What's my messaging and what might be the consciousness that can provide an opening here? If I can speak to their language, could I open the door a little bit wider? And fast forward, actually, it looks like we're able to.
That's awesome.
We're definitely going to come back to the point you just made about continuously starting over as a definition of success, which I think is a super interesting thought. The thing PJ said is kind of bouncing around in my head. You said capitalism has negative connotations, and it does for some people. I think, interestingly, I mean, capitalism is neither immoral or moral; it's amoral, and I think that adding, a word like compassionate in front of it changes that dynamic, takes it from something that is ephemeral and makes it more real. It brings it into people's lives, and it's one of the things that I loved about the book when I read it. It resonated with me, and it was I think a unique perspective, because I think for a lot of people in business, there was a time, and I think that time has passed, fortunately, where talking about your values in the context of business was not perceived as a good way. Organizations, corporations usually stayed out. There have even been some recent instances of that, but by and large, we now are in a different world where consumers especially are looking to do business with organizations who represent their values. And I think compassionate capitalism is now in vogue. When you started with this, it was not, and I give you some credit for bringing it into the mainstream the way that it is today. But let's talk about that point you just made. So continuously starting over is how you define success, and obviously this podcast is about overcoming obstacles, resilience, and perseverance. And I'd love for you to tell us about your own entrepreneurial journey. Was there any specific setback that significantly shifted your perspective on what it takes to be successful? And also, how did you wind up having that perspective that continuously starting over is in fact success?
Oh, I'll answer that question first, and then I'll laughingly come back into, were there any setbacks? The short answer is yes. But my dad was a serial entrepreneur. And if I've got a model for success in life, it would be him. Now, he was never wildly wealthy in any way, shape, or form, but he started a whole bunch of businesses, and every one of them were actually successful. He didn't like running businesses. He liked starting businesses. He loved finding opportunities and then, bringing a solution to that problem that he identified, and then just kind of leveraging it, and then selling the business, or having my mom run it, or whatever. Kind of went on with that. But the idea,
how did she like
I didn't
that?
have words for this back then.
Was she into that? Did she like that he was?
They worked together. I mean, they
Gotcha.
were hand in glove their entire married life, and
nice.
They were married almost 60 some odd years before mom passed, and then dad shortly after. But he continuously started over, and there was no pejorative around it. It was just kind of like, that's just kind of what we did. And somebody a long time ago told me that, you know, people find themselves in ruts a lot. And one thing my dad absolutely was fanatical about was not getting in a rut. Uh, and the person that was talking to me about this said, "But, you know, Blaine, you know what a rut is?" And I said, "Well, you know, enlighten me. You know, what do you think a rut is?" I know what it is visually, and I can, you know, imagine it on a road. He said, "A rut is nothing more than a coffin with the ends kicked out." And I went, "Whoa, okay." And that's how most people find themselves living their lives. They get into a position, they get into a role, they get into a company, they get into whatever they're into, and they think that this is going to stabilize and it's going to be this way forever. That wasn't my dad. He was, yeah, as soon as it got to a point where he got what he needed out of it, yeah, he was looking for another opportunity. And he never left anybody in the lurch. And there's a lot to be said about some of the ways that he handled, some of the ways that he moved. Yeah, never burned any bridges. I mean, it was always with a generative outlook. And this is part of where the compassion came back into play. And again, I didn't have words for it back then, but just, you know, using him as an exemplar, as a model for what was possible. So fast forward, you know, I've started a number of businesses. In '87, we started my company, Avatar Resources, and we ended up with affiliate offices in 5 different countries. Which, you know, gave me a lot of opportunity to fail because I wasn't, on the ground with a lot of these things, and I really didn't have the infrastructure necessary to run something that broad. And you know, stuff happens. I mean, just, you know, stuff happens. Well, you know, one of the things, and everything's got a 2 sides to it. Every up has a down. Every inside has an outside. And I remember distinctly, and I was just writing about this for an article I'm putting together right now. There was we were really in a cash crunch. And this goes back, maybe 20 years or so ago. And I had an opportunity to sign a big contract with a large Fortune company. Their Hong Kong, China subsidiary. And it was, very large 6 figures. It would have handled every one of our monetary needs. I mean, for the near and midterm, it was a big deal. And the managing director that was my counterpart that we were working with was just a prick. Excuse my language on this, but
that's all right.
He was the antithesis of every value that we said was important in the way that we wanted to work with ourselves and work with our client. And I tolerated it. And there was just this nagging thing. And just about a week before we got in the final draft on the contract put together, I just couldn't do it. I called him up and I said, we're not gonna move forward with this. And he went ballistic. And I was not going to compromise our values. One of the hardest business decisions I made, because it really put the organization on the precipice of actually going under. But yeah, the cost on the side of morale, on the side of value, integrity, all that stuff just wasn't going to be worth it. So I pulled the plug on it, and then we scrambled. And yeah, there were probably about 4 months of very sleepless nights. How do I pay the staff? How do I keep things together? I mean, the typical entrepreneurial journey. I say typical. We each make our own catastrophes, but you kind of keep the light in the tunnel shining and keep moving towards it. And that's what we ended up doing, and we survived. Yeah, and not only did we survive, we ended up thriving.
That the story that you just told, it's a fascinating story. It's a beautiful story. And I want to share because I want to be transparent. But there were moments in my career where I had clients or potential clients that I found, I'm going to use the word despicable, just in terms of their values, their morals, how they treated people. And I wish I could say that each and every one of those times I put my values first and walked away. But sometimes I was too scared to. Sometimes I felt like, you know what, this is too important, and I rationalized to myself why I should suck it up or put aside my values and morals. And I'll tell you what, there was never a single time that I did that I didn't regret it. Not a single time.
Yeah. when the idea of compassion, most people, when people hear compassion, they think it's kind of soft and squishy. It's kind of like, oh, kumbaya, and let me give you a hug. It's a bad day. That is not what compassion is about at all. Compassion, I have to be compassionate about my values. I have to nurture them. I have to take care of them. And that puts me in the position of making some incredibly hard decisions sometimes. Earl Nightingale was asked one time, how do you define success? And Earl Nightingale, for those of you that don't know who he was, back in the 50s, he was the most recognized recording voice on the planet. I mean, literally, he was one of the very first people that did recordings, talking, motivation. He was the father of the motivational speaking industry. But he was asked, how do you define success? And he thought for a little bit, and he said, success is the continual pursuit of a worthy ideal. Now, that worthy ideal is the catalytic piece. Worthy ideal speaks to values, it speaks to inspiration, it speaks to impact. And when you've got value, inspiration, and impact bundled together, you very seldom will go wrong. It's just an amazing way to work.
That's amazing. That's you should write a book.
Or 5.
Or 5, yeah, really. No, Blaine, dropping knowledge bombs all over the place. I love this. Okay, so in your latest book, which is the Leadership Mindset Weekly, you had shared some insights about, or you share your insights about what is effective leadership, and how do you feel is the best way to intertwine effective leadership with resilience and when you're facing significant challenges or you're back up against a wall, how do you parlay that?
Yeah, that's a great question, PJ. I had to come up with a definition of leadership that held water, so to speak. So, I mean, since Hannibal came across the Alps with the elephants, people have been talking about leadership, and most people in their minds have a hierarchical model. It's command and control, that sort of thing. And that, I think, was a very useful model at one point in time. It's not any longer. And so where I've come to define and how I've come to define leadership is it's a process of influencing. So there's 4 pieces to this: influencing others, which is the opposite of command and control, influencing, in order to co-create coordinated movement in the pursuit of a worthy ideal. So influencing others, there's a state of being that the leader now has to occupy that causes movement. That is generative. There's an influential dynamic in play here. Co-creation, I've got an idea, but if it's just my idea and you don't own it, you're not going to come along with me when the going gets tough. And this is where resilience starts to come into play in an organization. So co-creation is ownership transfer. How do I actually work with you influentially so that you begin to go, aha, God, there's a there for me, not just for you. And then the coordinated movement, we're going to be in a dance and we will step on each other's toes. There is no question about that. But how do we coordinate the conversation to continue moving forward, even though we've got bruised toes? And don't take it personally. It's, and it really has to do with that worthy ideal, for the sake of what, that we're doing this. So when we bring those together, again, in combination, we got impact, influence, and inspiration. And now you have a recipe, and it's actually a 4-ingredient recipe that looks like inspiration, impact, and influence, but a four element, 4-ingredient recipe that combines and it produces resilience. And resilience goes back to the capacity to continuously start over. Developing that capacity, and we've got a whole model around what that capacity actually looks like.
So in your view, as you think about leadership, in approaching nearly the middle, I can't believe it, but we're almost halfway, almost a quarter of the way through the century already.
I know, crazy.
Yeah, it's insane. As you think about leadership today, would you say that the biggest change is that, you said command and control has gone the way of the dinosaurs. And I think that's true. I think there are still some organizations that are attempting that. I would possibly say Elon Musk is trying to do that with X, formerly known as Twitter. And I think that that's, I think that that's a much harder road to row than doing what you just talked about, which I equate with choreographing a dance. So, when you choreograph a dance, you're not actually controlling the movements of the bodies of the people on the dance floor, but you're telling them directionally and ideally what you're hoping to accomplish, and how their interaction with the other dancers is going to create something beautiful and harmonious that would be enjoyable to watch. What is it that you think at this juncture, if I'm a young leader, I'm just coming into my own, and by young, I don't necessarily mean by age. It could be that I'm just beginning to finally have gotten the opportunity to lead. What would be one or two things that you would suggest that I start from as I think about how to move people in the direction of dancing in a more choreographed way without coming across like I am essentially trying to command and control the situation?
Yeah, great question. Excuse me. Two things come to mind immediately on this. One is, kind of a metric, it's kind of the litmus test of my effectiveness. And what I would use there, and what I actually do encourage the folks that I work with to use, is what I call elegance. And I'm not talking about sartorial elegance. Yeah. When you write code for a computer or for software, elegant code is code that does what it's supposed to do without any unintended consequences, any unintended results. And the command and control model typically has a whole lot of unintended consequences associated with it. I got to go back and clean up after myself, and there's more energy and resources wasted on cleanup than there is in the actual process of getting things to move forward. So using a metric of elegance, is what I'm doing elegant? How do people feel about themselves when they're in my presence? Do they feel engaged? Do they feel inspired? Do they feel, whatever? Or do they feel shamed, belittled, put down? All of that stuff. I can challenge somebody and have them rise to the occasion if there's an inspirational component to that. So elegance becomes part of that. The other one, and this is rooted in emotional intelligence, is developing a practice that continuously requires me to become more and more and more aware of myself. Self-awareness. What's going on in here? Because everything out there is nothing more than a reflection of what's going on in here. It literally is that. The world is a mirror. And it's a mirror of both my individual, but also our collective in an organization, our collective consciousness. And it's writ large out there in the results that we're producing. And so, that awareness, that self-awareness, what is it that I've, triggered here? How did I move that? That kind of an awareness allows me to move to myself first before I start correcting anybody out there, because they don't need correcting as much as I need to take a look at, okay, what was the miss on my side?
Blaine, when are you opening your church, dude, or your cult? I'm in. Everything you're saying is it's so I don't even say it. It's mind blowing, but also it's just natural. Like like everything you're saying is just very. I don't want to say
it's as it should be. It's as it should be, but it's not necessarily. It's self-evident, and yet elusive, right? So, I mean, as I could, again, being transparent, I've spent most of my career, as a lot of entrepreneurs do, offending, not taking to heart, the impact I had on people, and focusing more on bottom line results. And it took me years and some failures to recognize that maybe that's, by some people's definition, success, but it's not the kind of success I wanted. And unfortunately, I want to be clear. I think people that have worked with me over the years would tell you that for the most part, I was a very generous, very engaged, very loving and mentoring individual. But when I wasn't, I was offending and offensive. And it was because of lack of self-awareness. It was because I didn't quite understand what was triggering me. And how what was triggering me was impacting how I was coming across. and it takes some practices. You're exactly right. I mean, this is not just a matter of I wake up today and I decide I'm not going to offend. You have to understand what caused you to offend. You then have to develop the practices to help you see very clearly when you are offending or about to offend, and learn how to modify behaviors, your behavior first and foremost, towards something more constructive. And it's, yes, PJ, you're right. It's straightforward if you think about it. Don't offend. lead by not offending. And yet it's elusive, and a lot of leaders fall short. So, I mean,
I learned about this in the sandbox when you were a kid.
Yeah. Right. How do you play it? No, it's I'm a little bit different in that, I've had a lot of entrepreneurial experience. My father was also an entrepreneur, but I've also worked as a regular Joe, right? And I've worked for extremely large corporations, one of the top 5 brands in the world. And when I was there, I took it as a challenge to see how far I can get. And I got really far, which is great. I've also worked at very small startups and in between. And so I've had the ability or the honor to be in the presence of many different leadership types. And some were awesome and some were nightmares. And so luckily for me, it allowed me to, because I can be as pompous as anybody, but it allowed me to understand, oh, I don't want to be like that, right? Like I know how that made me feel. I know how, from a leadership standpoint, I got the ideal, I got the vision, right? That's why I'm here, because I believe that what we're doing is going to be successful. However, you can't treat everyone like dirt, right? Like it's given me a little bit of perspective that
you shouldn't treat anyone like dirt. I mean, that took me a while to realize, and it's probably my best lesson, and the thing I'm proudest of is now recognizing that you can't treat anyone any less than you want to be treated, and the moment you do, you're going to struggle as a leader and as a person. Period.
I'll tell you a really quick story. When I grew up, one of the people that my mom was really close to was a gentleman by the name of Ernie Albright. And Ernie Albright was one of the most fascinating people I ever met. He survived polio as a child. He became a pilot. He became a world-renowned safari hunter, first as an actual hunter. And then as he, got more self-aware, he was like, I don't like just killing animals anymore. Now he's a photography guy, right? So he's traveled the world. He also ran Pan Am for the Far East and for Asia and the Pacific. And I would go to his office, just me, little guy. I'd go to his office and he would take me down the elevator, and he treated everyone in that elevator, even though there were different companies, whatever, he treated everyone the same. And he was always cracking jokes, and he was always making people laugh. And that's where I kind of learned, like, humor is such a great reducer of barriers, right? If you can come across, if you can make someone laugh, if you can make them smile, that's where I was like, you know what? I want to make someone smile every day. If I can make a person smile that day, then I've done something good. I've had a positive impact. And he just, I won't tell you the joke that he told in the elevator, but
why not? It depends. Is that a joke that in 2023 you can't tell anymore? Because then you shouldn't tell it.
You could still tell.
Okay, go ahead. I want to hear it.
Elevator, and it's packed. The elevator is packed, right? And so, I'm, again, I'm like, I don't even know how 10, 12, whatever. And I'm like, hey, Uncle Ernie, how you doing? He's like, oh, PJ, let me tell you, I had a bowel movement this morning. I lost 12 pounds. I feel great. Right. So everyone on the elevator is just cracking up. And I was like, what's a bowel movement? But anyway, it was really funny. And so I just learned, just like, what Blaine, you're saying is
Blaine, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you had under no circumstance did you think we were going to be talking about bowel movements on today's podcast. Would that be right? Would that be fair?
Not on the radar at all.
Yeah. No. Sorry. I like to throw some curveballs. But it was just a great example of, this is a guy who is, on every piece of paper you want to write, incredibly successful and incredibly influential. And yet he is as human as they get. And that's something I've carried with me my whole life.
Yeah. When we talk about resilience, and that's a large theme of this program,
Mhm.
authenticity comes into play. I think
For sure.
people that have a predisposition towards resilience, if I could just kind of frame it that way, are people that are authentic. They're willing to laugh at themselves. They're willing to not take life too seriously. Yeah, and I was asked one time, how do you define authentic? I do a program for the American Association of Physician Leaders. On their training faculty, and somebody asked me, because the program I do is authenticity and leadership, and they said, "How do you define leadership or authenticity?" And I said, "Well, because I looked at Kierkegaard, I looked at Jung, lots of definitions. I basically came down to it's when I stop trying to manage your perception of me and just show up. Yeah, that's when I get to be authentic, is when I stop worrying about and trying to manage your perception of me, and I say, okay, this is just what it is. You get me the way I am. And that's what you're describing in the elevator ride. This is just the way I am. It's not situationally specific. Who I am comes through. Now, will I put on a different role every now and then? Yeah, but the who that is wearing that suit of clothes comes through. And that's where authenticity really has power for a leadership role, because it requires vulnerability.
Yep.
And people can't connect if you've got a facade. If you take the facade away, now they've got an opportunity to connect with you, and it requires vulnerability to do that.
Oh man,
It's a great point, and I wholeheartedly agree. And it's unfortunate. I think that for a lot of leaders, the starting point is to feel that you have to come across as knowing more, being brighter, working harder, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's changing. I think there's much more appreciation for work-life balance, much more appreciation for collaboration. But there's still, I think, this underlying, I talk to, my consulting practice, I talk to CEOs and startup founders, and there's still that mindset. We've even heard a little bit of that on some of our interviews of, well, I show up at 7 a.m. and I'm the last to leave, and I'm this and I'm that. And that type of mindset, I think, is frankly less likely to lead to long-term success. Certainly might not lead to long-term success as an individual. I think you're going to burn yourself out. I think you're going to be less effective as a partner and as a parent or as a human being. But as a leader, just as a leader, I actually think you're ultimately going to be less effective.
Well, you mentioned work-life balance. I think we got that formula wrong. I think it actually needs to be life-work balance.
Mm-hmm.
You put life in the front, and work.
Blaine, that should be the title of your next book. Can I get some royalties? That should be the titles of your next book. The life-work balance, reversing the mindset. Man, what a great idea! I'll co-write it with you if you'd like. Just say the word.
I love that. Yeah, we can talk about that one. That'd be kind of cool.
I want to ask you about you've had the incredible good fortune of not just working with domestic leaders, but also global leaders, and in some cases heads of government. And I'm curious, are there any common threads around resilience that you're noticing that are irrespective of culture or region or gender? Are there certain things that leaders who reach a certain level of prominence have in common when it comes to resilience, in your view?
I've not been asked that question before. I love that. What immediately pops into mind, I remember a conversation I had with Jorma Ollila, who was the CEO of Nokia. And I did a lot of work with Nokia back in the late 1990s and early 2000s. And the Finns, and Nokia is a Finnish company, the Finns have got a particularly what's the word I'd use here? A particular soft spot, I guess it would be, for the value of humility. As a matter of fact, Nokia at the time had humility as one of their core values. I don't know that they still do. I haven't visited that for a while. But my experience with leaders that have actually achieved the kind of resilience that we're actually referencing here, they tend to be humble. There is a certain amount of humility that comes into play here. And I think where that gets captured best is out of some Stoic philosophy. Cato and Marcus Aurelius. What I have control over in my life are my thoughts, my emotions, and my behaviors. Period. The end. That's all I can control. Everything else is a crapshoot. Now, I can have plans, I can have desires, I can have expectations, but when things go sideways, and this is where resiliency comes in, if I feel as if that result is me, I'm dead in the water. That result's just going to be what the result is. I did my best. I brought everything to the table that I knew how to bring. And now it's back to the drawing board. And one of the ways that I look at resiliency has to do with the language, the internal language structures that people operate off of. And language creates and also reflects reality. And most people are judgment machines. And it's good, bad, it's right, wrong. I like it, I don't like it. And that's a continual, perpetual conversation that's going internally and that gets expressed externally. And it's judgment. The problem with judgment is it stops motion. Leadership is an activity that is intended to create motion. And when judgment comes into play, motion stops because people contract, they get defensive. They start deflecting, they start excusing, all that stuff comes into play. So these leaders that are highly resilient, they by and large don't focus on good, bad, right, wrong. They don't focus on I like it, I don't like it. Their focus primarily is on, is this working or not working? Which is a values-free assessment of just what transpired. It doesn't assign an artificial value to it that is usually inherent in the individual. My schooling, my family of origin, my culture, whatever it is. Take the value structure out, and I don't mean values, but I mean the value good, bad, right, wrong. Is it working or not working? And this is where compassion comes into play. If my decision is going to have a detrimental effect on a stakeholder out there, that's probably not going to be working long term. I mean, I go back to that conversation about the contract that I said no to. That wasn't going to work long term. Now, would it have been good or bad? I could have gotten into that wormhole and stopped everything. As I kind of befuddled myself. But as soon as I went to this isn't going to work, it freed me up. It literally just freed me up to go somewhere else, to do something different, and to look at alternatives. The beauty of that, you move into evaluation, not judgment. You begin to connect dots in different ways. You see things that weren't visible before. And that's what the power of is this working or not working begins to illuminate. Oh,
it's interesting. It's interesting because I also very much, particularly over the last few years, have come to view judgment as generally toxic and oftentimes counterproductive. And I love the imagery of it stops motion. I hadn't thought of it in those terms before, and it makes a lot of sense. And by the way, this is not just true in business, it's true in life. It's true in your relationship with your significant other. It's true in your relationship with your children, right? And and many of us grew up with parents of a different era who themselves probably grew up in cultures that oftentimes were very judgmental.
So judgy.
Yeah.
So judgy.
Yeah. And it took me many years to recognize that judgment was holding me back, that I was constantly doing exactly what you just said, Blaine, judging inside my head often, sometimes even speaking it out loud, and not necessarily recognizing that I was oftentimes stopping motion. I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but I love that. I have this question for you, though, because, as I think about the decision you made to not work with the jerk, right? On some level, that's judgment, right? You made a judgment call. What's the difference between a judgment call and judgment?
Yeah, a judgment call, that's great. Yeah. That distinction. A judgment is, again, steeped in my value set. And usually it's a belief system. Well, it's always going to be a belief system that's in play. A judgment call, this is where that evaluation comes into play, and it's predicated on a for the sake of what? What is it that I'm actually trying to true to? And am I going to get it right all the time? No, that's why it's called a judgment call. I mean, it's kind of like all the data I've got right now says if I go that way, it's likely not going to work. If I go that way, it's likely going to work. So does this work or not work? And the judgment call is basically utilizing the 80% of data that I've got. I'm never going to have 100%, and just pulling the trigger on it. Earl Nightingale, or not Napoleon Hill. Highly successful people make quick decisions and then stick with them. Over the long haul. So, and that's organized around, does this work or not work? Not is it good, bad, not is it right,
I love
wrong.
that. I love that. I mean, what a fabulous answer. It makes so much sense to me. Thank you. I think I'm going to be thinking about that after the podcast, because, the struggle is this. I mean, when you're a CEO, when you're a startup entrepreneur, when you're a leader, you are hired to make decisions, and decisions on some level represent judgment, but it's the judgment call. I love that. It is about being able to determine whether this is leading you towards the outcome you're looking for, and that outcome is values-based, and that is a difference, and a good one. Thank you.
And I'll also throw in there that judgment, if we're talking about the stopping of motion, which again, Blaine, fantastic visual, and you're incorporating that with self-thought as an entrepreneur, and you're being harsh on yourself as judgment, that kills resiliency. Right?
Yeah.
That does not allow you to move forward.
Yeah. Everything is energy. And so what contributes to the expression of energy, or what constrains it? Judgment constrains the expression of energy.
Love that. What's your self-talk? I mean, how do you take extra measures to ensure that you're gentle with yourself? Do you think it's important for a person to be gentle with themselves?
Absolutely. I absolutely do. Research shows we have between 72 and 77,000 thoughts a day. Which, I mean, just it's kind of what? And I've seen that study replicated a couple of different times. Most of us aren't aware of those thoughts. They're just kind of, popcorn, just kind of popping off in there. The ones that stick are the ones that I want to pay attention to, the 3 o'clock in the morning conversations. That's typically when people are most harsh on themselves, and when they eyelids pop open at 3 a.m. and you go, you idiot. It's kind of like, okay, stop, back that truck up. So I've actually over time become fairly mindful of that. And I use the word mindful very specifically here. I want to be aware, and this is self-awareness again. The power of awareness is it illuminates choices that I wasn't seeing before. That's the power of awareness. Increase awareness, increase choice-making capacity, increasing choice-making ability. And I want to be aware of what these thoughts are. I start noticing patterns. Okay, how often does that repeat itself? Okay, if it's repeating itself far too frequently, I need to do something about that. Change the internal, I begin to change the external.
Love that. I want to talk about one more topic that I think, I didn't intend to go there, but I think I want to hear your thoughts on it. So entrepreneurs, and you said entrepreneurs oftentimes make quick decisions, and I think that's true, and I think it's needed. But it's also a very fine line between making quick decisions and being impulsive, or acting from an incomplete set of information, driven more by emotion, which, again, to be candid, because I like to first point the finger at myself, was something that I struggle with, and to a certain extent still struggle with. It's my tendency to I start from a place of motion and looking to act, and sometimes to my own detriment. What advice would you give someone who is either an entrepreneur, a leader, or just a person seeking to improve themselves, to help them evaluate whether something that they might choose to do is within the realm of, okay, that's, look, you're trying to build a business and you're going to need to make decisions, and so that's fine, as opposed to something that is actually just impulsive?
Yeah. That's a great question again, Tal. This is where, for me, Simon Sinek talks about, the why, get the why right. Again, I kind of think that's an incomplete description of what actually goes on with entrepreneurs, particularly successful ones. Highly successful entrepreneurs have not only a why for the business, but they got a for the sake of what that informs that why. I'm going to do this. Why? Well, because the market needs this solution. For the sake of what does the market need that solution? That's a bigger elephant, if you will. So if I've got a for the sake of what that is particularly clear, and this is where inspiration, impact, and influence comes into play here. If I've got that, I can override it in a knee-jerk emotional response to that looks good. And again, I use the word good here. It's it's kind of like, yeah, it looks good, it feels good, but will it work? That's the safe check. The governor, if you will. I reference it against before I pull the trigger against that for the sake of what. I feel compelled to do this.
Here's what I'm taking away from that. I'm taking away from that if you have issues of impulsivity, or you think you may, then preparing for yourself a list of 2 or 3 questions that you turn to before you act would probably significantly improve your decision making and significantly reduce the likelihood that you're going to have regret. Because at bare minimum, you will have thought through the bigger picture and the context. Would that be right? Would you agree with that, Blaine?
Absolutely. And you will use the word context. Yeah, a decision is a content piece within a larger context frame. Context is what gives meaning to all of the content that kind of lives inside that context. So one of the things that I've done is, if I'm making a decision, I want to stop, and this is where the question comes in. I want to stop and ask myself, okay, 2 or 3 ripples out, who's impacted and what is that impact? I know what the immediate one likely will be, but there's consequences that kind of ripple out. And if I can play that scenario out a little bit, I might kind of go, that probably not going to be working as workable as I would like it to be. It may take care of the immediate problem. And there's a whole problem solving model, that we can work with around that.
So give our viewers and listeners, if people were to walk away, maybe they want to go grab a pen really quick, the 2 or 3, or hit pause. I forget, there's podcasts, you can hit pause, right? It's not live radio. If you had to recommend the 2 or 3 questions that you think people who are concerned about impulsivity and want to make sure that they are being thoughtful should ask themselves before a decision, what would those 2 or 3 questions be?
For the sake of what am I making this decision? And 2 or 3 ripples out. I know what the immediate solution will likely solve. This decision will have this effect. But what effect will that effect have? And then what's the effect that effect will have? If I can imagine 2 or 3 ripples out, that will give me greater data, because usually I'm not operating with a full data set. I'm never going to have 100%. So, ideally I want to pull the trigger at about 80%. But I want to be informed enough to know that 80% is likely to produce the kind of result that I say I want. That's where that for the sake of what comes in. So identify the for the sake of what.
We're gonna create and sell shirts on our website that say for the sake of what.
Yeah.
Quote Blaine Bartlett. We might have to give him some royalties. I don't know about that, maybe, but I love that. And I really, really like that second, third ripple. I mean, first of all, I want to say that's not just in business. I mean, that's in life. I mean, when you're about to have an argument with your significant other, or you're about to do whatever you're going to do that, you may want to think 3 and 4 times about before you do it. It's great to ask yourself, for the sake of what am I doing it? Am I just doing it to feel better about myself, to be right, to rub their nose in it? And what will be the impact 2 or 3 ripples from here, right? What will be the impact? I think a lot of people, they I don't think they ask themselves for the sake of what, other than it's, but certainly that second and third ripple, that's higher consciousness. That, I mean, if you deploy it, you're going to live a better life. You're going to be calmer. You're going to be happier. The people around you are going to be calmer and happier. And if you're in business, you're likely going to be substantially more successful, make many fewer mistakes.
Yeah. You used the word right there just a minute ago, Tal. Most people on this planet, in my experience, would rather be right than get what they say they want. And that is the big obstacle right there for just about every relationship. And everything's a relationship. Everything is a relationship.
Validation is important.
Yeah.
Right?
I got to ask, I mean, this is, we may end up cutting this. I don't know, but I'm going to go there. I'm just
not cutting it.
We're not. Well, you don't know. You don't know. You don't know what I'm about to ask.
I don't care. We're not cutting it.
He trusts you.
Well, don't. I'm thinking, one of the really, really interesting things that's going on for me in life is watching the business world get increasingly better at less judgment, more compassion, more inclusion, and then watching our political system go the opposite way. And you know what? It's the same humans ultimately, right? We're the voters, right?
Yep.
Half this country, for some reason, is super comfortable with a guy that's, I find offensive. You can like him, that's fine. And I don't get it. I don't understand how we can be living in this world. And I'm not speaking specifically, I don't get that part. I mean, more broadly, I don't get how we have this dichotomy where on the one hand, we are becoming clearer about what works and doesn't work in interpersonal relations and in general to live a purpose-filled life. And then on the other, we've got a political system that seems to be espousing the polar opposite of that. Do you have any thoughts on that, Blaine?
Oh, I got a bunch of them.
I had a feeling you might.
Oh boy. It kind of goes back to this whole notion of right. You won't find this in the Webster Merriam Dictionary, but the definition of right is when the world and everything in it is operating according to my belief systems.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I get to feel right. If anybody's doing something that's opposite of my belief systems about how things should be, it feels wrong. And as soon as something feels wrong, I get defensive. I get, entrenched. I get, rigid. All that stuff. So we've got a political environment where this is the second part of my answer to this. Most people would rather be right than get what they say they want, which is collegiality, which is put the welfare of the nation and the people first. What's going on is the accumulation of power, and who's getting the power. This was true. This is still true considerably in business, but it's less true today than it used to be. Most businesses would tend to operate on a scarcity consciousness. There's only a finite amount of money to have. Maximize your profits and maximize the profit. It's about accumulation. Nature does not work with an accumulation model. Nature works most effectively, and nature is the only truly free market system on the planet. It's the only, there's no constraints. It's just a free market. Nature works off of a mindset, I'll just kind of anthropomorphize this, a mindset of distribution. Everything in nature serves as a center of distribution. Nothing serves as a center of accumulation. Our political system is organized around being centers of accumulation. The PACs accumulate as much money as you can. The political powers accumulate as much power as you can. And accumulation is toxic if it's allowed to be unbridled.
Absolutely.
Nothing in nature can accumulate forever.
I'm glad you added that sentence, because I think, look, ultimately capitalism is about accumulation. Toxicity is excess. And yes. I think that's what you're saying. I mean, ultimately, look, people want to follow leaders. That's true in business. It's true, it's true in politics for sure. It's when things turn from, for the sake of what, for the sake of what, and the second and the third ripple, I'm going to deploy that in my life. I got to tell you, Blaine, I think that's great. Now, if you haven't written about it, you should. In fact, we have a blog on the Braving Business podcast on our website, www.bravingbusiness.com. And I would love it if you would be kind enough to write something about that for our blog. I'd love to share it with
our
audience. I think it'd be amazing. Yeah. But, it's clear to me that thought of second and third ripple, and for the sake of what, is too myopic in our political system today.
It is.
And that needs to change. And I don't know how to change it. I mean, you introduced compassionate capitalism and made that a commonly used term. What do we need to do so that democracy has, some other word attached to it that maybe returns us to some sort of, it's not comedy, because comedy, comity, it's not that. Because it's not just for the sake of appearances. It's how do we return to a place where we are moving in the same direction and we are not each other's enemies?
Yep. I think, and this is just my bias, my perspective on this, but in the political domain, we have lost connection to a unifying, if you will, for the sake of what? It used to be, for the sake of a democratic model. We were the
Is that
freest.
because we had an enemy? I mean, was the fact that we had an enemy, for most of our existence, it was, the Soviet Union,
Yeah.
and they seemed evil and were more evil than certainly communism was far worse than capitalism, right? So is that what it is? I mean, do we need a foil?
There's an old organizational development joke that goes something to the effect of, we went away, we designed the perfect organization, and then we screwed it up when we put people in it.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what's going on. The founding fathers designed this perfect model. I mean, they used Athenian, Greek structures to build this thing. But the edifice of America, as it was originally formulated, I mean, if you kind of take a look at some broad brush strokes here, I'm not talking just about male centric or anything else, but the idea of democracy,
or white centric,
absolutely. But the large brush strokes of democracy were present, and there were admonitions that Franklin talked about, that Jefferson talked about the encroachment of biases around religion, creeping into the government. It doesn't have a place there. About money, as soon as money starts coming in, all bets are going to be off. I mean, so there were admonitions about how to safeguard this model, this ideal, and that for the sake of what was something that was aspirational. And we've gotten so far away from the aspiration right now. I mean, you look at the political parties, it's about getting power so we can jam the other guy.
Yep.
So we can get our agenda put in place here. Well, our agenda doesn't necessarily translate into the wealth or the health and well-being of the country, of the population, of the world.
Wow. Blaine, I first of all, thank you for all that insight. Thank you for everything that you've said on this episode, because it's been awesome. When I went to college, one of my minors was philosophy, right? So you dropped a whole bunch of names today, Marcus Aurelius and Kierkegaard, and like so many of them, right? Where I was like, oh, okay, I got to remember what all those philosophical bents were.
I'll be honest and say I've never read either of them.
Oh,
of course I've heard the names, but
right, Jeremy Bentham
sorry.
And utilitarianism and whatever, right? It's all great, and so it really gets me going. I would love to understand or know what your favorite quote is.
Put him on the spot. Why don't you, PJ?
Yeah.
He did that to me, by the way. He was interviewing me and he's like, what is your favorite quote?
There's two of them. One is mine and another one is Gandhi's.
Okay.
Okay.
Look at the company he's keeping. I love that.
I put myself right at that level. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. And I talked about humility. So
that's the other shirt, Gandhi and me.
Exactly. That's right.
But Gandhi talked about being the change that you want to see in the world. And I think that really everything is a reflection of the internal state, both individually and collectively. So if we want a different world out there, that different world lives in here, which goes to my quote, which is, it's already happened. I just haven't arrived yet. Whatever it may be. I've got an ideal. Compassionate capitalism for me is an ideal. Now, will it be realized in my lifetime? Probably not. That's not the point. What action can I take today to move myself closer to it is what I'm interested in. It already exists. I just haven't arrived. It already exists. We just haven't arrived. Everything that we encounter on this planet has been invented twice. First as an idea, and then second in physical form.
Oh, I love that. And
you start with the ideation. It's already there. It's not about creating it. It's about manifesting it. If I could get out onto that, that transcendental limb and kind of work with the law of attraction, which I don't want to go into, but it exists. So manifest. We're always manifesting something. We can't not manifest an experience in life. It already exists in my consciousness, and it gets writ large out there in my experience in the world.
Well, be the change. Be the change. Makes me think in the modern context, there's a young and I think brilliant poet, writer, and thinker by the name of Young Pueblo. Young is spelled Y-U-N-G. Young Pueblo. Well, I highly recommend if this audience doesn't know who he is, follow him on social media, pick up his books, and he talks about exactly that. Essentially, he says, the changing the world starts with each and every one of us making a commitment to change ourselves first, and then coming together collectively becomes easier. Now, I don't think he's naive either, right? As I don't think anyone has an expectation that we're going to reach some sort of nirvana or some, it's not happening, right? But that's not the goal. The goal is better.
Not the goal. It really isn't the goal. The goal is, Oscar Wilde, I think it was
continuous improvement.
Yeah, the striving for utopia. Yeah, when I first wrote the book, Compassionate Capitalism, people went, yeah, that's utopia. What are you talking about? And Oscar Wilde said, without the striving of, the continual striving towards utopias, progress is never occurring. And once we land on the shore of that imagined utopia, we look out again, and there's another one. And so we go out to that utopia. And why wouldn't I want to have utopia as part of my experience in living?
Well, and you know what? That brings a word to mind that I think I would encourage anyone in the audience to reflect on whether that word represents how they think. Because I think that is often destructive, and that's cynicism. Cynics never make things better. They only tell you how things can get worse or why things won't work. And if you are one, or if you have people in your environment, particularly if you're trying to build something, a business, a life, cynics, you've got to figure out how to limit their influence on your life, if not altogether remove it. Yeah. Would you agree?
I would. Yeah. And, and it's interesting, because cynicism is different than criticism.
Definitely.
Yeah. And there's an energy to cynicism that just kind of goes, it's toxic.
It's the why even start. That's what cynicism is to me.
Cynicism
is why even start. And you know what? If with that mindset, nothing gets done. Nothing.
Absolutely. Yep.
Friends, our guest today was the incredible Blaine Bartlett. He's a best-selling author, the author of the #1 international bestseller, Compassionate Capitalism, A Journey to the Soul of Business. His newest book is The Leadership Mindset Weekly. I'm going to order it online right after this interview is over. He is the co-host of Office Hours on Apple TV. He is just an incredible thinker, an incredible human being. And it's been an utter privilege to spend an hour with you today. I'm so grateful.
It's been amazing.
And I'm sure our audience, is walking away from this with 1, 2, 10, 15 pearls of wisdom that can make their lives better. And we're grateful for that. And you know what we're going to do, PJ? We're going to write them down. We're going to have the top 10 pearls of wisdom from the Blaine Bartlett episode. We're not going to put them on a t-shirt, but maybe a poster. What do you think about that?
I'll buy that one.
There you go. Blaine Bartlett, thank you so much.
Hey, Tal, PJ, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk. I love it. Thank you. I love what you guys